Masechet Yevamot, Daf Chaf Vav. We complete the second perek today and begin the third. So the last Mishnah says, "V'chulam shayu lahem nashim v'metu mutarot linaseh lahem." Beforehand, we've been discussing various men who facilitate a woman being able to get remarried. For example, a judge that comes and says, "This vow that she made sticks, and we cannot undo it. And it's a vow that causes the couple to get divorced. So we say that judge cannot then go and marry the woman, because then there's a suspicion that he had ulterior motives in prompting them to get divorced. Or a messenger who brings a get, or a witness who comes and says, I saw your husband died, or I killed your husband. All these people, because they had a role in allowing the woman to go free, they are suspected of perhaps doing that in order to marry that woman, and therefore they are not allowed to marry the woman. Okay, but now this Mishnah adds an exception. If these men were already married when that happened, so this guy who comes and says, I saw your husband died, he was happily married, and only afterwards his wife died, the witness's wife died, then we do not suspect that at the time that he gave that testimony, he had ulterior motives, because he was already happily married. So if afterwards his wife dies, then he may take the woman who he helped free. On the flip side is also true. If that woman who was freed got married to someone else, a third party, and then subsequently was divorced or was widowed from that second man, then they can go back and marry the judge or witness or messenger, because there's someone in between, so we don't suspect that they arranged the separation from the first husband in order to marry this this judge or witness. And furthermore, let's say a man comes and says, I saw that your husband is dead. So he cannot marry her, but his brother can marry her, and we don't suspect that he testified that this guy's her husband is dead in order that his brother can go. His brother came to him and said, listen, can you testify, or can you judge this case such that they will get divorced because I want to marry her, and do me a favor? We don't suspect that someone is going to do that for their brother or for their son, and therefore this judges or witnesses, close relatives, can marry her. Good. So we'll analyze each case. Metu in nitgadeshu law. So we say here in the opening case that if the judge or messenger was married and his wife died, then he can take this woman. But if he got divorced, then no, because if he got divorced, maybe he prompted the divorce in order to marry this the woman that he helped free. So we're not going to expect that, if his wife died, that was not in his control. So he couldn't have expected that to happen. But divorce, he could have prompted in order to marry this woman. So then their suspicion remains. Okay, now we have a baraita that contradicts that derivation, that inference. Amar Rav Hillel Rav Asher, v'hatanya afilu nitgadeshu. We have a baraita that says it's more lenient. It says even if this judge subsequently divorced his wife, it's still permitted for him to go and marry the woman that he was in judgment of her vow. So we have a contradiction. Which one is it? We go and do research to see, was there this judge's, I'm just giving an example of a judge, but it applied to the messenger or the witness. Was this judge happily married, or did they already have a quarrel between them? If they already had a quarrel, then while he was judging, then we do suspect, because maybe he says, oh, you know what, I'm having a fight with my wife, and look at this nice woman who came. Let me help her divorce from her husband so that I can marry her. So then there's still suspicion. But if at the time he was a judge, his marriage was fine, there was no quarrel, and so then we don't suspect that he would prompt this woman to get divorced. It just means that there was no quarrel at that time. Afterwards, something came up and he divorced his wife. And so in that case, there's no reason to suspect what happened before. Okay, you can turn these the opposite way around also and make a similar argument. But I think that one makes more sense. Or a second answer to this. No, maybe all the cases is that this judge was not having a quarrel with his wife at the time that he was judging. And still we can answer the question. We have to go investigate who started the fight afterwards. If he made a judgment and then he started a fight at the time of judgment, everything was peaceful in his own marriage, and then this judge started a fight with his wife, then we suspect that at the time of judging, he was saying, oh, you know what? Let me prompt this couple to get divorced, and then I'll start a fight with my wife and divorce her so I can marry this one. So I can marry this woman who just came along. So then there would be suspicion. And that's what this Baraita is talking about. No, sorry, that's what our Mishnah is talking about. And whereas this Baraita that says, even if it was a divorce, it's permitted, that's where the judge's wife is the one that started a quarrel. He didn't want to get divorced. She started, and then they got divorced. So then there's no reason to suspect that he freed the woman that came to him on purpose. And so in that case, we can be lenient, and that's what the Baraita is talking about. Good. Now, in all these cases, if she gets married, the woman who was freed by the witness or by the judge, and she gets married in between, and then is divorced or widowed, then she can go ahead and marry the judge or witness or messenger. So at first, we suggest that we will apply the case of death to the case of death. In other words, if the witness came and said, I saw that your husband had died, and then she gets remarried to a second man, and that man dies, then he can go and marry the witness. So those would go together, and the get cases would go together. That would mean if a messenger came and said, here's your get, and I saw it, and then she gets divorced from that first husband. She gets married to a third party, not related to anyone, and gets divorced again, second time from that guy. Then she can go and marry the original messenger. So at first we're setting up the case like that, but then that would box us into a certain opinion. If that's the case, then we have to say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says 2 times make a chazakah, and that would mean he says that in general, and that would apply to if a woman is married to one man and he dies, the second man and he dies, then she's already presumed to be a murderous wife, and the third person should not marry her. And so that would contradict this case, because here, if we say it's mita amita, that she was married, a man comes and says, I saw your husband died. She remarries, her second husband died. Then she would not be able to go and marry the witness because that would be a third marriage after 2 of her husbands died. And the Rabbi says after 2, she's already considered a bad luck person and shouldn't marry a third one. And so then we'd have to say that our Mishnah is against the Rabbi. But we'd rather not box it in. So we say, La mita gerushin v'gerushin amita. You can equally explain our Mishnah that we're talking about one and the other. That's so the witness came and said, I saw your husband is dead, and she gets remarried and to someone not related. And the second husband then divorces her. Oh, so now she has one dead husband, one divorced husband, so there's no chazakah, or first gerushin and then mita, and that also would not make any chazakah, and now Mishnah could, in fact, follow the opinion of Rabbi as well. Good. Now, all these women, although the judge, messenger himself cannot marry her, the judges or messengers or witnesses, brother or son, can marry her. And now we ask a question from a Tosefta that says that a man who's suspected of committing adultery with a certain woman, he not only may not marry her ever, but he also may not marry her mother, daughter, or sister. So here it's prohibited for this someone suspected of marrying the woman's relatives, but in our Mishnah, it's permitted for the man who's suspected for his relatives to marry her. So why is there a difference? They should be parallel cases, mirror cases, and then either both be prohibited or permitted. And so we'll give a couple of answers. One is nashe legabe nashe shechichan de azlan, gabre legabe gabre la shechichan. It says it is common for women to go visit other women, their other relatives, and maybe even stay there overnight. And so therefore we worry if this woman who's suspected of adultery with a man, if he would marry that suspected adulteress's sister, well, then the suspected adulteress may come over to visit her sister, who's the wife of the suspected adulterer, and then while they come over, then they will be together again. And so we want to make sure that this they stay far away from each other, and so that's why we prohibit the suspected adulterer being with the relatives of the suspected adulteress. However, men do not generally come over and sleep over or stay over for a long time, and therefore we do not suspect that this judge, say, is going to go to his brother's house and stay for a while and then sleep with his brother's wife, who he is suspected of having freed. So that does not happen as much. The men stay at home and sleep at home, and so we don't have to worry about that case. Or alternatively, or another answer is that women would not make each other prohibited. In other words, if a man came and he suspected of adultery with this woman, and then he would go marry that woman's sister. So even if he would be with the suspected adulteress, it would not prohibit his own marriage to the sister of the suspected adulteress. So therefore, the sister is not going to worry so much if he should come over and sleep with the sister who is the suspected adulteress. She's not going to be happy about it, but because even if she does, their marriage remains intact, because a man being with another woman is not considered adultery if she's single. So then she's not going to be so careful. Whereas a brother will, right? If this suspected adulterer goes to his brother's house and should sleep with his brother's wife, who he was suspected of freeing, then that would render their marriage prohibited, because she is now an adulterer and she would have to leave the marriage. So therefore, the brother is not going to allow his brother, who's the judge or the witness, to do anything. And so we don't have to make any gezerah out of them ourselves, because the consequences are so high for the brother who is married to her. So that's why it's permitted in our Mishnah. Okay, so now we last ask, what about the father? You see, in this case, it said mother, daughter, or a sister. But in our Mishnah, it just says that the brother or son of the witness or judge can marry the woman. It doesn't say anything about father, so shouldn't you include father? And we say, yes, in fact, lami baya kamad. And I don't have to say father, it's obvious. Lami baya aviv de beziz benemine. I don't have to tell you that the father can marry this woman who the son, who's a judge, freed, because a son is going to be embarrassed before his father. He's not going to go take his father's wife just out of respect. He wouldn't do that. But the other way around, maybe not. Maybe a father would not feel embarrassed to take his son's wife. And so maybe over there we say there's a reason to not permit. So Kamash Mala, the Mishnah says, no, we don't have to worry about such a case either. And therefore, the relatives of the judge, messenger, may marry the woman who that person helped out of their marriage. Hadran alach kesad eshet achiv. The third perek begins with the case that we've already seen a few times. Arba'a achin shenai mehen nisuin shete achayot umetu hanisuim et ha'achayot hare elu chosot velo mityabemot. The case is there are four brothers. Two of them are married to two sisters, and those two brothers die without children. In this case, neither brother can perform Yibum. The reason is because they have a Zikah. Levi has Zikah to Rachel and to Leah. And so therefore he cannot take Rachel because she is Achot Zekukato. It's as if they're married. And then there'll be a problem of marrying a sister. Someone that you're already married to. And so same thing with the other, and same thing for Yehuda. Nevertheless, the woman need to be freed. And so therefore, both brothers will perform Halisa. And if they don't ask a betin, and they just go ahead and perform Yibum and marry them, it's still a problem. The betin forces them to divorce, because since at some point the Rachel fell to Levi for Yibum, and he was prohibited from taking her. Once falls to Yibum and is prohibited because of Achot Zekukato, then he becomes prohibited forever. And therefore, even and that would apply to both brothers and both sisters, and so we forced them to leave. However, this is subject to machloket. Rabbi Eliezer omer, Bet Shammai omrim yekayem, uBet Hillel omrim yosiu. That which we said in the Stam Mishnah, that is the opinion of Bet Hillel. However, Rabbi Eliezer, this is Ben Hurkinus, a student who was a Shamuti, a student of Bet Shammai, he notes that according to Bet Shammai, it's not serious enough. It's not like they were the prohibition is not serious enough that would make them prohibited if they do get married. So lechatechila, they should do yibum, but if they go ahead and they should do chalitza. But if they do perform yibum, they can stay married according to Bet Shammai, in the opinion of Rabbi Eli, according to the tradition of Rabbi Eliezer. Next case, hayta achat mehen asura al echad isur arva. Asur ba umutar bachota vasheni asur bishtehen. If you have a variation of this case where, let's say, Levi is related to Rachel, for example, he married Rachel's daughter, right? This would be Reuven married a mother, and the other brother Levi married a daughter, that's fine, that's permissible. And then the same scenario as before, Reuven and Shimon die. So now Levi cannot take Rachel because that's his mother-in-law. Because of that, and that's Isur Karet, there's no Zikah at all. So since there's no Zikah with her, Levi can perform Yibum with Leah. It's totally fine. And so in that case, Levi would perform the Yibum with Leah. Yehuda, however, remains in the same situation. He cannot take either, because before Levi takes Leah for Yibum, he also has a Zikah to both. And so both are prohibited as achot zekukato. And even after Levi takes Leah, still, since at one time Yehuda had a zikah to take Leah, but was prohibited from fulfilling it, therefore he is prohibited to the Rachel even afterwards. Okay, so that's the second scenario. Next, Isur mitzvah, Isur kedusha, choleset, velo mitya bemet. Let's say in this case, it was not Isur karet here, but rather it was a sheni la'adayot, which Isur mitzvah d'rabanan, or maybe Levi is a Kohen Gadol, and so he cannot take Rachel because she is an almana, right? Or other scenarios where there is a prohibition, but the prohibition is either a lav or d'rabanan. In that case, Levi cannot take Rachel, but it's not that the prohibition is not strong enough to have no zikah. There is still some zikah, so then in that case, Levi would not be able to take Leah. It will be like the first case where both brothers have to perform halisa. הייתה אחת מהן אסורה על זה איסור ערווה, והשנייה אסורה על זה איסור ערווה, אסורה לזה מותרת לזה, ואסורה לזה מותרת לזה. Okay, another variation is where both brothers are prohibited to one of the sisters. So same as the second case, Levi is married to Rachel's daughter, that's his mother-in-law, and Yehuda is married to Leah's daughter. So that's as his mother-in-law. So since Levi is prohibited to Rachel, he is allowed he is allowed to do Yibum with Leah. And since Yehuda is prohibited to Leah, he is allowed to do Yibum with Rachel. And so in this case, you have nice symmetry, and everyone can perform Yibum. And this is the case that we had mentioned in a previous Perek. The Mishnah mentioned it in a short form, and said if you have a case of a sister who is also a sister-in-law, like in this case, you can choose to either do chalitza or you do yibum. What's the case where you could do yibum? A case like we just mentioned, when one of the brothers is prohibited to one of the sisters, a sur karet, then he can take the other sister. Good. Shema mina yesh zika. So according to this, we can conclude that a levirate bond is substantial, that it is like being married, and in terms of prohibiting the sister of the sister of the Yevamot. Okay, and that's how we explained this entire Mishnah so far. Because if not, if zika was not significant, then in the regular case, they should be able to both take each one, because this is not like a sister, right? If we say zika is not anything, so Levi could do yibum with one of them, Yehuda do yibum with one of them. After all, they come from two different houses, meaning two different husbands. So they both, it's not like two wives of one husband. So they both need yibum and both can do it. And that's if it would be fine if there were no zika, because then we would not consider Leah to be the sister of a zachot zikukato, because it wouldn't matter. So from the fact that the Mishnah says it's prohibited, we can deduce that the Mishnah thinks that yesh zika. Okay, but now we say no, not necessarily. Maybe there is no zika. So how do you explain the prohibition to do yibum in the Mishnah? Mishum de kasavat asur levatel misvat yevamin dilma adim yabem had mayit ad idach bekambatel misvat yevamin. Answer is because you cannot do something actively to prevent the possibility of performing yibum or chalitza later. So here, if there's no zika, so fine, Levi can take Rachel. And the plan would be that Yehuda would take Leah in Yibum, but there's a possibility that Yehuda may die before he does so. And if he would die, then Leah still needs, no one did Yibum Chalitza with her. Levi cannot do Yibum Chalitza because he is married to Rachel. He did Yibum with her, and now this is his wife's sister. So he would not be able to perform Yibum, and so then we would, this Levi taking Rachel for Yibum would do an action that may have the possibility of causing a scenario where Leah would not be able to do Yibum or Chalitza with anyone. And so this is a principle that you cannot actively do something that may nullify the possibility of doing the mitzvah, going through the mitzvah of Yibum or Chalitza. Okay, but now we challenge this explanation, because if that was the point of the Mishnah, then you could say the same thing with just three brothers. You don't have to have a case where it's four brothers. Even if you just have three brothers, I forget that Yehuda is here, and you have two. So you have Levi. So two brothers die. Levi can choose either Rachel or Leah. If he chooses Rachel and he performs Yibum with her, then Leah will be stuck because he will not be able to perform Yibum Chalitza with her, because he will not be able to perform Yibum with her, because that will be the wife of the sister of his wife, and then he is nullifying the possibility of Yibum. And so even with three brothers, you can explain this case, and you don't need to talk about four brothers. Now, it's important to point out that in such a case, Leah would be free to marry anybody else without Yibum or Chalitza. In other words, if let's say there's only three brothers, Levi does Yibum with Rachel, so he cannot do Yibum or Chalitza with Leah. And since there's no possibility, so then there's no need, and Leah would go free. Nevertheless, it's not a problem for Leah. The problem is that we want, if there's a possibility of doing a mitzvah of Yibum, through Yibum, the best, second best chalitza, then we don't want to do something active that will prevent us from doing that. So the idea is that it would be better to do 2 chalitzas than 1 yibum, is a fulfillment of 2 mitzvot, even though in the second best way, than 1 yibum, and then Leah would have nothing. She would just go free without performing any mitzvah of yibum or chalitza at all. So that's our point, that if it's just because of the batal mitzvah Yevamot, you could have had three brothers. And we answer, Lami the Mishnah wants to add yet a bigger chidush. Lami tilata, of course, with 3 would be it's mebatel mitzvat yibum. Devadai batla mitzvat yibamin, because for sure he is by doing yibum with one sister, automatically the other sister is prohibited. But if it's 4 brothers, so then there's a very real possibility that he'll do yibum and Yehuda will do yibum. Who says Yehuda is going to die? He doesn't have a terminal illness or anything. So therefore, most likely, it'll be fine. So you might think that in that case, yes, do yibum. And we don't have to worry about the far-off possibility that Yehuda is going to die, right? But during that time, after Levi does yibum and before, he is able to do yibum. So you might think we don't have to worry about that. And that's why the Mishnah talks about a case of 4 brothers to teach us that even that case we do worry about, and we don't allow either to do yibum, both have to do chalitza, just in case. Now we ask, wait a second, then why not teach the case even with 5 brothers? We answer because we don't have to worry about 2 dying. In other words, like this: if there were even another brother, even 5 brothers here, then two of them die. So Levi does yibum with Rachel. Now Leah could perform yibum with either Yehuda or the 5th brother. And so even if Yehuda dies, the other brother can do it. Or if the brother dies, Yehuda can do it. The only case where this would mibatel misvat yibum is if both brothers died, and that's a really far off possibility. So why not say that that's the case of the Mishnah, and that even that case would be prohibited? And we answer says no, we don't worry about that. Okay, so that's the limit according to this explanation of the Mishnah. It's only with 3 or 4 brothers that you do have to chalitza. If there were 5 or more brothers, then Levi could do yibum, and then one of the other brothers would also do yibum, and that way we can do all of the misvot with yibum. Okay, this will only be according to this explanation. According to the first explanation of yesh zika, then actually would not matter how many brothers there are, because they all have the problem of zika with both of them. And so that would be a practical nafkamina between the 2 explanations. Amar Rava, bar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Shalosh achayot Yevamot shenaflu lifnei shnei achin Yevamin, ze choles la'achat, veze choles la'achat, b'emsa'it tzricha chalisa mishenehem. All right, so now we have a new case as follows. You have 5 brothers. It's a nice transition. We just talked about 5 brothers. And here, 3 of the brothers marry 3 sisters, and the 3 brothers die. So, okay, we know that they're going to have to do, you can't do yibum like in the previously, assuming, yeah, because 3 of them die, there's only 2 brothers alive. So according to all opinions, no one could do yibum, you have to do chalitza. The question is, how you do chalitza? So he says, Reuven would do chalitza, Rava just said, Reuven does chalitza with 1 sister, Shimon does chalitza with another sister, and then the 3rd one, they both have to perform chalitza too. Why? Amad le Rabba, mideka amart emsa'it tzricha chalisa mishenehem, kasabat yesh zika, v'havyala chalisa pesula, v'chalisa pesula tzarich lahazor al kol ha'achin. So we are now introduced to a new concept of halisa pesula, an invalid halisa. It's not totally invalid. This means in a case, a full chalitza would be in a case where a person could do yibum and they decide to do chalitza. If you could do yibum and instead you do chalitza, then that is a full chalitza keshera, and that has the power to release all of the other women. If Reuben does chalitza with, and all the other brothers. If Reuben does chalitza to chogla, then Shimon does not have to do chalitza. Reuben's just like if Reuben performed yibum, it would release all the other brothers. So too, if you do a full chalitza, it releases all the other brothers. We're going to see in a few minutes that it would also release any co-wives, a full chalitza. However, if you have a situation where you cannot do yibum for whatever reason, but there is still a zikah, so then you have to do a chalitza. But that chalitza is called chalitza pesula. And in such a case, the Reuven has to do chalitza in order to break that zikah, but that's not powerful enough to break also Shimon's zikah. And so Shimon also has to perform chalitza. And so in this case, when Reuven does chalitza for chogla, Shimon to tirsa, and now Milka also needs chalitza, Reuven has to do it and Shimon has to do it because each of them have a problem that they are achot, she is achot zekukato, and now they're going to be achot chalutzato also. And so since they cannot do yibum, the chalitza is pisula, and so all the surviving brothers have to do chalitza. So that explains the third case. But now we ask an obvious question: if so, then also the first two, right? With chogla, Reuben cannot perform yibum with chogla because that's achot zekukatoya, zika to the other ones, to the other sisters as well. And so even this first one is a chalitza pisula, and so really Reuven and Shimon should have to do chalitza with all three women. So why not? We answer, indeed, you're right. If all three brothers die at the same time, and their zikah begins all at the same time, then you're right. It would have to be such that would in fact be the case. Both brothers have to do chalitza to all three sisters. But the case that we were talking about here, that in the name of Rav, was talking about where they die only one after the other, like this. Nafla hada halas la Reuven, nafla ida halas la Shimon. So first Levi died, and so chagla was available. And so Reuven, in that case, does chalitza to chogla. So that's fine because he could do yibum. Right? The sisters are married to live husbands, so there's no problem. Since he could do chalitza, he could do yibum. The chalitza is a full chalitza, and Shimon does not need to do anything. When Tirsa dies, then it will be a problem for Reuven because that would be his wife's sister. But Shimon has no problem; he does yibum, and that's full, and that takes care of everyone. But now, when Milka dies, now we have an issue because no one can do yibum to her. Naflaida halas la Shimon, naflaida halas la hai mafka zikato, halas la hai mafka zikato. But if now assuming they did yibum rather, right? So they did chalitza. Sorry, Reuven did chalitza to chogla. Shimon did full chalitza to tirsa. So they're totally fine. Now when Milka dies, so she has to do something. Because she has a zikah to Reuven and a zikah to Shimon. However, she is also achot chalutzato, and we hold that even after you do chalitza, there still is a remnant of the original zikah, and so this would be taking a chalutza's sister, and so neither can perform yibum. Since neither can perform yibum, their chalitza is chalitza pesula, and that's why they only for the middle, meaning the third, whoever dies last, his widow would need chalitza from both, and that explains the case. Okay, good. Now, question: Rav en zika. Rav was of the opinion that there is no zika, and this whole explanation is only assuming that yesh zika. And the answer is yesh zika kama. Rav was giving this case for the opinion that says yesh zika, even though he himself thought en zika. Okay, good. And that's all for Rav. Now, Shemuel Amar, Ehad Choles Lechulan. Shemuel says something surprising. Right? In this case, that all three die, Reuven can do chalitza to all three, and that is totally fine. Now, how so? Mikedi shaminan le lishmuel damar chalisa ma'alya ba'enan damar Shemuel halas lachayot lo nifteru sarot. How could this be? Because Shemuel says you need a full halisa. He also agrees with this law of halisa pesula. How do we know that he says that? Because in a variation of the case, he says if someone does halitza to sisters, the co-wives of those sisters do not go free, because like in a case similar to ours, where these men also have other wives. And so if the Reuben does chalitza to chogla because it's a chalitza pesula, since he has a zikah to other sisters, so then not only is it a problem for Chogla, who still needs something for Shimon, it's even a problem for Chogla's co-wife, because it's not a full chalitza. So we know from that Shimon thinks that there has to be full chalitza. Chalitza de Shimon, chalitza keshera, chales la Reuven, chalitza pesula. If the case is where they die successively, and so first Chogla falls, Reuben takes her when does chalitza with Chogla, and then Tirsa becomes available. And so if Shimon would do chalitza, then fine, that's good. That's a full chalitza. But once Milkaka, so it's good for Shimon to do it. But if Reuben would do chalitza first to Chogla and then to Tirsa, then that is a problem. That is a inferior chalitza, and it would not be sufficient to permit Tirsa to break the zikah of Tirsa to Shimon. So how would this make any sense for Shemuel to say that one can do chalitza to all of them, right? It just doesn't work. So we answer, when we say that one does chalitza to all of them, we don't mean all of them, we mean the middle one. Okay, wait a second, you said all of them. No, since most of them is one, so here you have Reuben would do chalitza to Chogla, Shimon would do for Tirsa, then only one of them needs to do chalitza to Milka, and that would be sufficient. In Shemuel's opinion, there's a difference between a full zikah and an inferior zikah. So when they die successively and Reuben takes Chogla, fine. And then when Tirsa dies, so Tirsa has a full zikah to Shimon, whereas she is the achot chalutzato to Reuben. So this is only a partial zikah. In that case, if Reuben would do chalitza, that would not be sufficient to break the full zikah of Shimon. So Shimon should do the chalitza. However, once you have Milka, so Milka has an inferior zikah to both Reuben and Shimon. In that case is where the machloket is. Rab would say that you need a chalitza from both because both are inferior chalisot. So inferior chalitza is required to break both zikot. According to Shemuel, however, because they are all Reuven and Shimon are equally inferior in their zikah, therefore only one needs to do. Either one can do the chalitza, and that even if though it's an inferior chalitza, is sufficient to release her from the other brother. Okay, so that is Shemuel's opinion. That's one answer. Or another way to explain Shemuel. When Shemuel says you need a full chalitza, that's only for a case of co-wives. If any of these brothers had a co-wife, then and they died at the same time, then Reuven taking Chogla, for example, doing chalitza to Chogla would not release the co-wives because it is also a hot zikukato, and so the co-wives would need a separate chalitza. That's what Shemuel said, but he did not say anything about doing chalitza for one that would be a problem for Shimon. So he does not agree with Reuven, with Rav. Instead, he says that even this type of chalitza pesula is sufficient, And so even if they all die at the same time and all presented, or even if different times, if none of them did Chalisa first, if they're all presented as Yevamot, all fall to Yevamot, to Reuven and Shimon at the same time, and therefore none of them could do Yibum, and they all have to do Chalisa. That Chalisa, even if Reuven does Chalisa only with all three sisters, that is sufficient as a good enough Chalisa to permit them to Shimon, even though it would not permit co-wives if the case where co-wives existed. And the next section, we're going to go and analyze Shemuel further in depth. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.